Wyoming Territory, 1876. The wind howled over the sagebrush hills outside of Laramie, dragging dust and judgment behind it as it hit the porch of the tiny, weather-worn cabin where Zadie Faulkner stood with her arms wrapped tight around her two children. "Ma, they're back," whispered 9-year-old Nellie, her fingers clutching the hem of Zadie's faded skirt. Zadie didn't need the warning. She could see the mounted figures through the screen of wind-blown dust. 3 men in dark coats, one in a preacher's collar, come again with papers and polite threats. She pulled Nellie close, her other hand resting on the shoulder of her youngest, 5-year-old Nathan, whose face was buried against her side. "Stay inside," she said, heart pounding. "Lock the door just like I taught you." But Nellie started. "Now." The children obeyed, slipping inside as Zadie stepped off the porch, boots sinking into the soft spring mud. Her dress flapped against her legs and her jaw was set tight as stone. "Mornin', Miss Faulkner," said the preacher, voice smooth as creek water. "We've come to talk, not to fight. You have papers," she said flatly. "That's fighting." "Zadie," he said, using her name like they were friends, "we all know it's been hard since your husband passed." 3 years ago," she said, "and I've held this land together every day since. My children are fed, clothed, and safe. That's more than some can say." The tallest man, a county official she'd only seen twice before, cleared his throat. "There are concerns. The children aren't enrolled in school. There's no male head of household, no formal income." "Some are saying, some," she cut in. "Or your wives over tea," the preacher's eyes narrowed. "It's not personal." "It is to me," he sighed. "We're placing them with the McCrearys in town, temporarily, just until a proper home is arranged." "You can make a petition," her voice dropped, deadly calm. "You are not taking my children." But they did. It happened fast. She fought, clawed, and screamed, and still they rode off with Nellie and Nathan in the back of their wagon. Nellie's face pressed against the slats, eyes wide and wet, Nathan's cries echoing down the road long after the dust settled. Zadie collapsed to her knees in the mud. 2 days passed. Then 4. She went to town every morning, stood on the courthouse steps with her petition, and was told to wait. She wasn't stable, she didn't have suitable lodgings, she was not fit. On the 6th day, she rode out to the McCreary ranch, stood at the gate, and asked to see her children. Mrs. McCreary took one look at her and said, "They're better off with us. You're no mother." Zadie didn't cry. She just turned and walked back to her mare. She did not go home. Instead, she rode west, past the cottonwoods and the empty creek bed, until she found herself on the edge of the Randall Ranch, land known for cattle, hard men, and one cowboy who kept mostly to himself. His name was Nash Rhoades. Zadie did not know him, not really. She only remembered that he had once stepped in when a ranch hand raised a hand to a boy in the street. He had not shouted, he had not made a show, he had simply stepped between them and said, "He's a child. You hit him again, I'll knock your teeth down your throat." That had been enough. She needed someone like that. She waited at the fence until he rode back from the southern pasture, a lasso coiled at his hip, and the sun painting his face in gold and sweat. He slowed his horse when he saw her, his eyes cautious but not unkind. "You lost?" he asked, swinging down. Zadie's hands were shaking. "I need your help." He looked at her, really looked at her, then said, "What happened?" "They took my children," she said. "They called me unfit." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing yet. "I know it's not your problem, I know you don't owe me anything, but I need someone to ride with me, someone they'll listen to." He studied her, then nodded once. "All right, just like that. I seen you with your kids in town, I seen the way they look at you. You're more of a mother than half the women I know." He paused, voice low. "You say they're in trouble, that's good enough for me." Zadie blinked fast. "Thank you." Nash turned to his horse. "We ride at first light." They did. By noon the next day they were in town. Nash didn't say much, but when they stood before the judge, he was the one who spoke. "She's the best mother I know," he said, voice steady and sure. "She works harder than most men, her home's clean, her kids are safe. She just needs a little help, not her children stolen out from under her." The judge stared at him. "And who are you to say?" I'm a man who knows what a bad mother looks like, Nash said, and she ain't one. It still took a few more days, paperwork, inspections, but Nash stayed through it all. He rode back and forth with Zadie to the cabin, helped her fix the roof, build a new pen for the goats, even brought tools from his ranch. When the inspector came, they didn't just see a widow with a crumbling house. They saw a home, and 4 days after that, she got them back. Zadie knelt in the courthouse yard as Nellie ran to her, arms flung wide, Nathan clinging to her waist with a sob caught in his chest. "I missed you," Nellie whispered. "I missed you more," Zadie said, kissing her forehead. "We're going home." Nash stood nearby, arms crossed, watching. Not intruding, not expecting, but when Zadie looked up, her eyes found his. She walked to him, her children at her sides, and said, "You brought them back to me." He shook his head. "No, you did that. I just helped." Zadie hesitated, then reached for his hand. "Come to supper tomorrow," he smiled, quiet and sure. "Would not miss it." And for the first time in a long, long time, Zadie felt her heart steady, not just because her children were safe, but because someone had seen her, chosen her, and she had chosen him. The wood stove hissed softly in the corner of the cabin as Zadie ladled rabbit stew into 3 tin bowls. The scent of rosemary and onion filled the tight space, drifting into the corners where shadows clung. Outside, snowmelt dripped steadily from the edge of the eaves, tapping a slow rhythm against the barrels she used to catch water. Spring had come late and stubborn, but it had come. Nathan sat cross-legged on the floor, carving a scrap of pine with a blunt knife Nash had given him. Nellie, quiet as a sparrow, stitched a patch into the elbow of her brother's shirt, her needle steady despite the uneven light. Zadie handed her daughter a bowl, then crouched beside Nathan, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Enough whittling for now," she said gently. "Eat while it's hot." He looked up, eyes wide. "Is Mr. Rhoades coming?" He said he would, she replied, standing again. "He's just finishing up at the Randall place." Nellie's voice was soft. "Do you think he'll stay after supper?" Zadie didn't answer right away. She stirred the stew pot slowly, watching the steam curl. "We'll see." It was late dusk when hooves crunched over the gravel path, and Nash appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, coat dusted with road grit. He ducked inside, shoulders broad enough to cast a shadow across the back wall. "Evenin'," he said, voice low as ever. Zadie nodded toward the empty chair. "Stew's ready." He sat careful with the space, like he didn't want to take up more than he ought. Nathan slid the carved pine toward him, a crude horse, legs thick and uneven. "I made it for you," the boy said. Nash picked it up like it was made of glass. "That's so. Looks like a good trail mount." Nathan beamed. After they'd eaten, Nellie and Nathan curled into the straw mattress in the loft, whispering between themselves. Zadie stood at the sink, scrubbing the bowls clean with ash and water. Nash leaned against the doorframe, watching the sky fade from indigo to black. "You always this quiet after you save someone's life?" she asked without looking at him. His voice came slow. "Never had much cause to find out." She turned, drying her hands on her skirt. "You could have gone home after that hearing. No one expected you to keep coming back. You didn't stop needing help." "I can carry water and chop wood. It's not that." "I know." They stood like that for a stretch. The wind outside had gone still. "I've been thinking about the land behind the shed," she said. "If I clear it, I could plant carrots, maybe string beans. Wouldn't need to rely on the store so much. You'll need to amend the soil. That side's heavy with clay." Zadie raised an eyebrow. "You know vegetables now?" "I know dirt," he said. "And what grows in it?" She laughed, brief and real. "Fair enough." A silence settled again, but it was easier this time, like they'd both learned how to breathe inside it. Nash stepped forward, setting the little carved horse on the mantel. "You got a strong place here, not just the cabin. The way they look at you, the kids, that kind of trust, it doesn't come from nothing." Zadie's voice was soft. "They're all I've got. They know that, and they know you'd burn the world down to keep him safe." "That matters." She looked up at him, something shifting in her eyes. "You speak like someone who needed that once." He didn't answer right away. She didn't press. Instead, she stepped closer, just enough that their shoulders brushed. Her voice dropped. You planning to leave when the roof's fixed and the garden's in? His gaze didn't waver. You asking me to stay? I'm asking if you want to. He reached up slowly, brushing a curl from her temple. I do. Zadie's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Then stay. Their hands met between them, fingers curling together like it had always been meant. He kissed her there in the hush of the kitchen, not rushed or hungry, just steady and sure. A promise, not a question. When they parted, neither said anything. They didn't need to. Outside, the sky held its stars quiet, and the wind did not rise again that night. The thaw came slow that year, reluctant and uneven. By late April, the high plains still wore patches of snow in shadowed places, but the fields behind the cabin had softened enough for planting. Nash stood at the bottom edge of the new garden plot with a hoe in one hand and his sleeves rolled to the elbow. Zadie worked beside him, sleeves damp with sweat, a loose braid falling down her back. Her hands were raw from tilling, but she didn't slow. You ever plant anything before? She asked, pausing to stretch her back. Potatoes once, he said. Didn't turn out well, I buried 'em too deep. She laughed under her breath. You plant like you bury a body, seemed reasonable at the time. Zadie shook her head, amused. Carrots don't need much, just space to breathe. I didn't know that mattered. It does for anything trying to grow. He looked over at her, dirt on her cheek and sun catching in the curve of her jaw. You always talk like the ground remembers. It does, she said. So do people. They worked in companionable quiet after that. By midday, the rows were marked and the seeds pressed into place. Zadie walked the last furrow with a bucket of water, careful not to disturb what they'd laid down. Nash leaned on the fence, watching the sky shift above the hills. Randall wants me to take a permanent post, he said, not turning. Zadie stepped beside him, her brow furrowed. Doing what? Overseeing the southern herd, year-round, comes with a bunkhouse and a 50-head share. She studied him. You going to take it? I haven't said no. Why not? He rubbed at his neck. It's steady, clean work. I'd be out past the river mostly alone. You like being alone. I'm used to it. That's not what I asked. He glanced at her then. No, I don't. Zadie nodded slowly. Then don't go. He didn't answer, but his eyes didn't leave hers. That evening they sat on the porch while Nellie read aloud from the tattered book Zadie had kept since before the war. Nathan made a line of small stones along the edge of the steps, humming under his breath. The light was soft, full of gold and the smell of turned soil. When the children had gone inside, Zadie stayed seated. Nash remained beside her, his shoulder brushing the worn rail. You said once you knew what a bad mother looked like, she said. What happened to yours? He hesitated. She left when I was little, didn't say why. My father drank himself into the ground inside of 5 years. After that, I moved from one bunkhouse to the next. She was quiet for a long breath. You ever think about finding her? I did, once. Tracked her to a boarding house outside of Omaha. Knocked on the door, but when she opened it, I didn't say who I was, just said I was passing through. Zadie turned to look at him. Why didn't you tell her? I wanted to see if she'd recognize me. She didn't. Zadie didn't reach for him, didn't offer comfort he hadn't asked for. But her voice was softer when she said, You didn't deserve that. He nodded once, slow. Neither did your kids. The wind picked up, rustling through the birch at the edge of the field. Zadie's voice was quiet. You could stay here. Nash didn't move. You sure? I wouldn't ask if I wasn't. He looked at her then, fully. That'd mean something permanent. She held his gaze. That's what I want. He leaned in, not fast, not out of hunger, but with the quiet certainty of someone who'd waited long enough. When their lips met, it was steady, warm, a joining rather than a need. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I'll build us a barn, he said. Before winter. Zadie smiled, eyes shining. And I'll keep the carrots alive. They stayed like that as the sky dimmed behind the hills, the porch creaking beneath them, the world slowly settling into something that felt like home. Late May brought a stretch of dry days and a warmth that lingered even after the sun dipped below the hills. The garden behind the cabin had begun to show honest green thin rows of sprouting shoots pushing through the dirt like cautious hope. Zadie knelt between the rows with Nellie, teaching her how to thin the seedlings without damaging the roots. Nathan sat nearby with a long stick in hand, drawing tracks in the loose soil and pretending they belonged to wagons and cattle drives. Inside the cabin, the scent of yeast rose from a covered bowl on the table. Zadie had started baking more since Nash had moved in, not for him exactly, but because the cabin felt fuller now and full homes deserved bread in the oven. She stood and stretched her back, brushing dirt from her palms. "Nellie, fetch the eggs." "Check the high roost, that red hen favors it." The girl nodded, wiping her hands on her apron before running toward the coop with a practiced gait. Zadie turned to Nathan. "You finish those tracks, they're not for wagons anymore," he said, eyes focused. "Now they're for horses. Big ones or fast ones? Both." She smiled faintly and ruffled his hair before heading toward the shed where Nash had been working most of the morning. He was crouched by the doorframe, fitting new hinges into place, a small box of iron nails beside him. His shirt clung to his back and a trail of sawdust lay across his boots. He didn't look up when she stepped into the shade beside him. "You're favoring your left leg," she said, "stepped into a badger hole last week. Didn't want to say anything with the children near." She crossed her arms. "You could have told me." "I could have," he said, setting the final hinge into place. "Didn't want you worrying. I'd rather know than guess." He sat back on his heels, looking up at her through the fringe of his hair. "You ever get tired of doing everything yourself?" She hesitated. "I used to think I had to, that if I leaned it meant I was weak." "You still think that?" "Less now." He stood, brushing dust from his hands. "If I build that barn, I want to use the north slope behind the goats. There's more shade and the wind doesn't cut as sharp there." "I thought you were just fixing the roof." "I was," he said, "but I'd like to keep stock of my own now, something to put my name on." Zadie studied him. "You planning to stay long enough to need a name on something?" "I already have." She didn't answer right away, but her hand found the inside of his elbow, resting there for a quiet moment. Then she said, "You'll need more fencing if you're putting stock up there." "I'll split rails tomorrow." They walked back toward the cabin together, boots soft in the dust. The chickens clucked in the yard and Nellie met them halfway with her apron full of speckled eggs. "The red hen pecked me," she said, showing a small welt on her wrist. Zadie took her hand gently, inspecting it. "She's always been high-strung." Nash crouched beside the girl. "Want me to show you how to hold her next time so she don't do that?" Nellie's eyes lit up. "Yes, please." Zadie watched as he led her toward the coop, kneeling beside her, his voice low as he explained how to press gently behind the wings. Nathan trailed behind, stick abandoned, watching with quiet curiosity. Later that evening, once the children were asleep, Zadie sat beside the hearth, mending one of Nathan's socks by firelight. Nash stood at the table, cleaning and oiling his saddle, the familiar rhythm of it filling the silence between them. "I never thought I'd have this again," she said softly, eyes on her stitching. He didn't ask what she meant. He just listened. "This kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't feel empty. After I buried Everett, everything sounded hollow." Nash dipped the cloth back into the tin of oil. "You loved him." "I did. Not in the way folks write about in books, but he was kind, gave me children, made me laugh sometimes. That's worth more than most." She looked over at him. What we have now, it's different," he nodded. "It should be. Does it scare you?" "I've been scared of things before," he said. "Starving winters, men who can't be reasoned with, but never this." Zadie folded the sock and set it aside. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll move the goats to the upper pen. Give them more room. I'll follow your lead." She stood and crossed the room to him, resting her hand on the side of his face. "No," she said, voice steady, "not just follow, walk beside me, always." He didn't speak. Instead, he leaned into her hand and closed his eyes. That night, they lay in the quiet warmth of the cabin, the fire low and the wind held at bay. And for the first time in years, Zadie slept without waking once. By early June, the creek behind the cabin had begun to run clear again, fed by meltwater from the distant snowy range. Zadie stood over it at dawn, pail in hand, watching the current slip over stone. The children were still inside, curled under the quilt Nash's sister had sent from Colorado Territory, a gift Zadie hadn't asked for, but one she'd folded with care and accepted all the same. Nash came down the slope carrying 2 coils of wire fencing and a leather pouch of nails. His shirt was damp at the collar, and his boots left clean impressions in the wet grass. "You didn't come back to bed," he said, setting the wire down. "I couldn't sleep," Zadie replied, tipping the pail into the shallows. Too many thoughts crowding each other. He crouched and picked a stone from the bank, turning it in his hand before tossing it into the water. "You want to speak them out loud or keep them where they are." She knelt beside him, her fingers trailing through the cold current. "The school teacher came by yesterday. Said they're looking for someone to help with lessons out this way. Just a few families, but they want someone steady. You thinking of taking it? I'm thinking I might. It'd bring in a little money, keep me close to the children." Nash nodded slowly. "You'd be good at it." She looked over. "You think so? You've got a way of speaking clear without making folks feel small. That's rarer than most believe." Zadie smiled faintly. "I never thought I'd teach again, not like this." "You taught me how to mend a fence that won't fall in the wind," he said. "Seems like a fair place to start." They walked back together, the pail swinging between them. At the edge of the cabin, Nellie was feeding the goats, her braid falling loose, and Nathan was hauling kindling with both arms wrapped around the bundle. Neither looked up when their mother and Nash passed. They didn't need to. They'd grown used to the quiet rhythm of them moving side by side. That afternoon, Nash brought down the first of the cedar beams for the barn. He traded 2 weeks' riding work on Randall's North herd in exchange for the lumber, an agreement made without fuss or talk. Zadie helped hoist the frame posts, her hands blistered by evening, and when the sun dropped behind the ridge, they sat on the unfinished threshold, eating bread and onions and a wedge of sharp cheese. "Remind me next time not to argue with you about the weight of green lumber," Nash muttered, rubbing at his shoulder. Zadie passed him the water tin. "I did tell you." "You did," he admitted. Loud enough for the hawks to hear. She leaned back on her elbows, eyes on the barn's skeleton rising behind them. "You ever think about what comes next? For us? For all of it?" "I think about it every time I wake up and you're breathing beside me." She turned her head. "You're not just here because it's easier than being alone." "No," he said. "I'm here because you're the first place I've ever wanted to stay." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It stretched wide and sure like open land. Later that week, they rode into town together, the children bundled in the wagon bed with a blanket and a jar of boiled sweets. Zadie walked into the schoolhouse with her letter of intent. The teacher, a woman with a crooked nose and a silver hair comb, handed her a slate and asked her to teach a lesson on fractions while she watched. Zadie did, without stumbling once. On the way back, she rested her head on Nash's shoulder beneath the canvas top. The horses clopped slow and steady over the rutted road, and Nathan fell asleep with his head in her lap. That summer passed with long days in the field and quiet nights at the table. The barn rose beam by beam, and by August it held a pair of dairy cows and a gelding Nash had raised from foal. Zadie's name was added to the town register as an official teacher for District 3, and every Friday she sat beside the other instructors while they marked papers and shared stories over cornbread and chicory. One evening, as the sky turned amber, Nash pulled a ring from the pocket of his vest. It wasn't grand, just a plain gold band, bought off a traveling peddler with a cracked tooth and a cart full of tin goods. He didn't kneel. He simply stood beside her in the doorway of the barn, dust in his hair, and said, "If it's what you want, I'd be proud to call you wife." Zadie didn't speak. She took the ring with both hands, slid it on, and then kissed him slow, with the weight of every mile they'd walked to reach this place. They were married beneath the cottonwood near the creek, the one that had held through every storm since Zadie first came west. Nellie wore a crown of wildflowers and Nathan carried the basket of bread. There were no speeches, no announcements. Just the two of them, hands clasped, eyes steady, the wind quiet for once, Years passed. The garden grew thick with beans and early squash. The chickens multiplied, and Nathan built a tree swing from a length of rope and a cedar plank. Nellie learned to play hymns on the old reed organ someone donated to the schoolhouse, and Zadie kept teaching until the day her hair turned silver at the temples. Nash built a second stall in the barn and took in a neighbor's orphaned colt. He never left, not for a ride, not for work, not even when Randall offered him more land up north. He had already found the only place he ever wanted to be. And in the quiet hush of each evening, as the fire burned low and the cabin walls held strong, Zadie would look across the room at the man who had stood beside her when the world tried to take everything, and know, without question, that he always would.